The summer sun beat down on the crowded streets of London as tourists from around the world gathered to see the famous changing of the guard ceremony outside Buckingham Palace. Among them was Jason Miller, a 28-year-old man from Chicago, who had saved money for 3 years to make this trip. He stood sweating in the July heat, growing more and more upset as people pushed and shoved to get a better view. Jason wiped sweat from his forehead and took another sip from his large soda cup. The fizzy drink did little to cool him down or improve his mood. This was his 4th day in London, and so far, the trip had not lived up to his dreams. The hotels were smaller than expected, the food was bland, and now he could barely see the famous guards because of the huge crowd. The red-coated royal guard stood perfectly still at his post, face showing no emotion under his tall black hat. These guards were known for never breaking character, never moving, never responding to tourists who tried to make them laugh or react. Jason had watched many videos about this online before his trip. They really do not move at all, not even a little bit. Jason asked his friend Mike, who had come with him on the trip. The midday heat was making Jason more and more annoyed, and the sweet soda in his hand was not helping his mood. Not even if you scream in their face, Mike replied, looking at his friend with worry. Jason had been acting strange during their vacation, taking risks, and causing trouble in ways that were not like him back home. Just yesterday, he had almost gotten them kicked out of a museum for touching a display after being told not to. All around them, tourists snapped photos and recorded videos. Children pointed and laughed. Some brave visitors posed next to the guard for selfies, making funny faces while the guard remained frozen like a statue. The guard, whose name tag read Wilson, stood at attention. His eyes stared straight ahead, looking at nothing and everything at once. His red uniform was perfect, not a thread out of place. His black boots shined in the sunlight. He looked like a perfect toy soldier come to life. As Jason watched the guard standing there, so calm and unbothered, while Jason himself felt hot, tired, and angry, something inside him changed. Maybe it was the heat, maybe it was being tired from travel, or maybe it was the 3 beers he had drunk at lunch. But Jason suddenly felt the need to do something to get a reaction. "I bet I could make him move," Jason said to Mike with a strange smile. "Do not even think about it," Mike warned, grabbing his arm. "These guys are real soldiers. They can arrest you if you bother them." But Jason pulled away from his friend. The crowd seemed to close in around him. The heat felt worse. The noise of the tourists became too loud. Without thinking clearly, Jason stepped forward toward the guard. "Hey, British guy," Jason called out, moving closer than visitors were supposed to. "Are you even real, or are you some kind of robot?" The guard did not respond, not even a blink. This made Jason even more frustrated. He looked down at the cold soda in his hand, now half empty. A terrible idea came to his mind. Mike saw the look on his friend's face and tried to stop him. Jason no. But it was too late. In one quick motion, Jason threw the remains of his soda directly at the guard. The dark liquid splashed across the guard's bright red uniform, dripping down onto his shiny black boots. A loud gasp came from the crowd. People stepped back in shock. Phones went up immediately, recording what was happening. Parents pulled their children away. Everyone went quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. No one, especially Jason, was ready for what the guard did next. Everyone expected the guard to remain still. That was what these guards were trained to do. They stood like statues through rain, snow, and all kinds of tourist bad behavior. But Corporal James Wilson, who had been a royal guard for 3 years after serving in the army, did something that no one saw coming. He moved. The movement was slow and controlled. His right foot stepped forward with a loud click of his boot on the stone ground. The ceremonial rifle in his hand stayed in perfect position against his shoulder. His face showed no anger, no emotion at all. The crowd fell completely silent. For several seconds, no one seemed to breathe. Even the birds in the nearby trees went quiet, as if they too were waiting to see what would happen. Jason froze in place, his empty cup still in his hand. His smile disappeared as he realized that what he had done was much worse than a simple prank. The soda dripped down the guard's uniform, staining the bright red jacket that had been clean and perfect moments ago. Then Corporal Wilson did something that shocked everyone even more than his first step. He spoke. "Sir," his voice was clear and strong, reaching even the people standing far back in the crowd. "You have disrespected not just me, but my uniform, my regiment, and my country. I will now have to leave my post." Two police officers who had been watching from a distance quickly moved toward them. The guard made a small signal to his left, where another guard stood ready to take his place in case of emergency. Jason's face turned pale as he understood how serious this was. This was not just a joke gone wrong. He had committed an offense that could get him arrested in a foreign country. Mike backed away from his friend, shaking his head. "I told you not to do it," he said, but his voice was lost in the tense silence. What happened next surprised the onlookers even more than the guard moving or speaking. Corporal Wilson removed his white gloves, one finger at a time, never looking away from Jason. When both gloves were off, he handed his rifle to the second guard, who had quickly marched over. "I have stood at this post through rainstorms and extreme heat," Wilson explained, his voice carrying across the now silent crowd. "I have kept my position during medical emergencies and security threats. I do this out of respect for tradition and out of love for my country." Jason tried to say sorry, but the words stuck in his throat. His hand shook slightly as he realized hundreds of people were watching him, and at least 50 phones were recording everything. The corporal reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a white handkerchief. With careful, exact movements, he began to clean the soda from his uniform as best he could. "This uniform represents hundreds of years of history," the guard continued. "Many brave men have worn it with honor. And you thought it would be funny to throw your drink on it." A woman in the crowd started to clap slowly, and soon others joined in. They were not clapping for Jason, but for the guard who was handling the situation with such control and dignity. The police officers were now only steps away from Jason, ready to take him away. But before they could reach him, Corporal Wilson raised his hand slightly, stopping them. This small gesture showed that he was in control of the situation. The guard folded his now dirty handkerchief neatly and placed it back in his pocket. He looked directly at Jason, his eyes stern but calm. "I believe you have something to say, sir," he said. The crowd waited. Tourists from all over the world stood perfectly still, watching this unexpected drama unfold in front of one of London's most famous landmarks. Everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Jason looked at the serious faces around him. He saw the stained uniform of the guard, the waiting police officers, and the many phones recording his shame. He knew that whatever he said next might determine whether he spent the night in his hotel room or in a London jail cell. Jason opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. His face felt hot with shame as hundreds of eyes stared at him. The empty cup was still in his hand, evidence of what he had done. "I am so sorry," Jason finally said, his voice cracking. "I do not know what I was thinking. It was stupid and wrong." Corporal Wilson stood tall, looking down at Jason from his greater height. The proper response to a mistake is to admit it, fix it, and learn from it. Are you willing to do that today? Jason nodded quickly, relief washing over his face. Maybe he would not be arrested after all. "Yes, sir. I will do whatever you ask." The guard looked at the wet stains on his uniform, then at the puddle of soda on the ground near his boots. "Then perhaps you could start by cleaning what can be cleaned." Jason looked confused for a moment. Then understanding dawned on him. He knelt down, and to everyone's surprise, took off his own white t-shirt. It was an expensive shirt with a famous brand logo, but without hesitation, he began using it to wipe the sticky soda from the stone ground. People in the crowd looked at each other in amazement. Some even stepped forward with tissues and water bottles, offering to help. A young woman handed Jason a small pack of wet wipes. "Thank you," Jason said quietly. accepting the help. As Jason cleaned the ground, Corporal Wilson stood watching, his face still showing no emotion. But there was something in his eyes now, a hint of approval perhaps. Mike, who had been standing back in shock, finally moved forward to stand by his friend. "I will help too," he said, taking some of the wet wipes. Together, the two friends cleaned the stone pavement as best they could. The crowd had gone from shocked to curious, and now to respectful. Many were still recording, but the mood had changed completely. When they finished, Jason stood up. His knees were dirty from the ground, and his expensive shirt was ruined. But something had changed in his face. The anger and frustration were gone, replaced by genuine regret, and maybe even respect. Corporal Wilson looked at the police officers and gave them a small nod. They stepped forward, but instead of putting handcuffs on Jason, one of them just took out a notepad. "We need your full name and the place you are staying in London," the officer said. "This incident will be recorded, but no charges will be filed as long as you write a formal apology letter to the regiment." Jason quickly gave them all his information, thanking them repeatedly. The tourist sighed with relief when he realized he would not be spending the night in jail. The guard turned to the replacement soldier who had been standing nearby. "I will now change my uniform and return to duty as soon as possible," he said formally. Before walking away, Corporal Wilson looked at Jason one last time. "Respect is earned, not demanded," he said. "Remember that during the rest of your visit to our country." With those words, the guard marched away toward the palace gates. The crowd parted respectfully to let him through, and many people nodded to him as he passed. Some even clapped quietly. Jason stood there, shirtless and humbled, watching the guard leave. "I will never forget this," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. Mike put a hand on his friend's shoulder. "That man could have had you arrested, maybe even sent home. Instead, he taught you something important." The replacement guard had now taken position, standing as still as a statue, just like Corporal Wilson had been before the incident. The ceremony continued as if nothing had happened, but everyone present knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, many tourists approached Jason, but they did not yell at him or call him names as he feared. Instead, they wanted to talk about what they had all just seen, a powerful moment of dignity overcoming disrespect. "I need to write that apology letter," Jason told Mike as they walked away from Buckingham Palace. "And I need to make it the best letter I have ever written." Back at their hotel room, Jason sat at the small desk by the window. Outside, London continued its busy pace, but Jason was lost in thought. He had borrowed one of Mike's shirts for the walk back, feeling strange and exposed without his own. "I still cannot believe what happened today," Jason said as he stared at the blank paper in front of him. The hotel had given him proper writing paper when he explained he needed to write a formal apology letter. Mike was lying on his bed, scrolling through his phone. "Well, you are now famous. The videos are all over the internet. There are already millions of views." Jason groaned and put his head in his hands. "Great. My parents will see it. My boss will see it. Everyone back home will see what an idiot I was." "The good news is that most of the comments are actually positive," Mike said, still looking at his phone. "People are impressed by how you apologized and cleaned up. And everyone loves the guard. They are calling him the most dignified man in Britain." Jason picked up his pen and began to write. He crossed out his first few attempts. Nothing seemed good enough. How do you apologize for something like this? What words could make up for such disrespect? While Jason struggled with his letter, something unexpected was happening at the guardhouse behind Buckingham Palace. Corporal James Wilson had changed into a fresh uniform and was preparing to return to duty when his commanding officer called him in. "Wilson, what you did today was against protocol," the senior officer said, his face serious. Wilson stood at attention. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir. You know the rules. Guards are to remain in position regardless of tourist behavior unless there is a security threat." "Yes, sir." The officer looked at some papers on his desk, then back at Wilson. However, your handling of the situation has resulted in an unexpected positive outcome. The palace has received hundreds of emails praising your response. The royal family has been informed. Wilson remained still, but his eyes widened slightly. Furthermore, the officer continued, several veterans groups have contacted us, saying your actions showed the perfect balance of discipline and humanity. It seems you have become something of a symbol, Corporal. I was not trying to become a symbol, sir. I only wanted to protect the dignity of the uniform. The officer nodded. And you did. In a way no one expected. He handed Wilson a folder. These are some of the messages we have received. You may read them later. For now, you are to report to Captain Jenkins. He will be overseeing a press statement about the incident. A press statement, sir. Yes. When a video gets 20 million views in 3 hours, the palace needs to respond. Meanwhile, back at the hotel, Jason was finally finishing his letter. He had written and rewritten it 7 times, but he was finally satisfied. The letter was honest, humble, and straight from his heart. Done, he said to Mike, who was now ordering room service for them. I will deliver it to the palace tomorrow. Mike looked up from the menu. Do you think you will see him again? The guard. Jason folded the letter carefully and put it in an envelope. I doubt it. He probably never wants to see my face again. What a story to tell when we get back home, though, Mike said. Remember that time you threw soda at a royal guard and almost got arrested in London? Jason did not laugh. It is not funny. I did something really stupid today, but I also learned something important. What is that? That real strength is not about making someone else look small. It is about keeping your own dignity, even when others try to take it away from you. That guard, Wilson, he could have yelled at me or had me thrown in jail. Instead, he showed me what real class looks like. As night fell over London, neither Jason nor Corporal Wilson knew that their paths would cross again, in a way that neither of them could possibly expect. The next morning, Jason woke up early. He wanted to deliver his apology letter to Buckingham Palace before the crowds got too big. He put on his nicest clothes, a blue button-up shirt and black pants that he had packed for a fancy dinner. Do you want me to come with you? Mike asked, still looking tired as he sat up in bed. Jason shook his head. No, this is something I need to do alone. He took the envelope with his letter and left the hotel. The morning air was cool and fresh, very different from the hot day before. As he walked through the London streets, Jason noticed people looking at him. Some pointed and whispered. He pulled his shoulders back and kept walking. He deserved whatever shame came his way. When he arrived at Buckingham Palace, there were already tourists gathering, but nothing like the crowds from yesterday. Jason approached a police officer standing near the gates. Excuse me, he said nervously. I need to deliver this letter to the Royal Guard Regiment. I am the person who threw the soda yesterday. The officer looked him up and down. Wait here, he said, and walked away to speak into his radio. Jason stood there, feeling very small in front of the huge palace. He wondered if they would even accept his letter, or if they would just tell him to go away. After a few minutes, a man in a dark suit came out to meet him. Mr. Miller, I am Thomas Bennett, Public Affairs Officer for the Royal Household. Please come with me. Jason was surprised to be led through a side gate into the palace grounds. He had not expected to be allowed inside. They walked through a courtyard and into a building to the side of the main palace. Am I in more trouble? Jason asked as they walked down a hallway with paintings of men in military uniforms. On the contrary, Thomas replied. Your letter was expected, but there has been a development. Someone wants to meet with you. They entered a small office where a man in military dress uniform stood looking out the window. When he turned around, Jason recognized him immediately. It was Corporal Wilson. Jason stopped in his tracks. I did not expect to see you again, he said softly. Wilson nodded formally. Mr. Miller, I understand you have a letter for the regiment. Jason stepped forward and handed the envelope to Wilson with slightly shaking hands. I wrote it 7 times to get it right. I am truly sorry for what I did. Wilson took the letter and placed it on a desk without opening it. Your apology is accepted, but that is not why I asked to meet with you. Jason looked confused. I do not understand. The video of our encounter has become what they call viral, Wilson explained. It has been viewed by millions of people around the world. The palace has received thousands of messages. Thomas stepped forward. What Corporal Wilson is trying to say is that something unexpected has happened. Your actions were wrong, but your response afterward has resonated with people. The way you accepted responsibility and made amends has turned this into a positive story. Jason could hardly believe what he was hearing. So I am not in trouble anymore. The legal matter is closed, Thomas confirmed. But we have a request. The palace would like to use this incident as a teaching moment. We are planning a small press conference. Would you be willing to appear with Corporal Wilson to talk about what happened and what you learned? Jason was shocked. This was the last thing he expected when he woke up this morning. He looked at Wilson, whose face was as serious as ever. Would that be okay with you? Jason asked the guard. For the first time, Wilson gave a small smile. I believe it would serve a greater purpose. Sometimes the best lessons come from our worst mistakes. Jason nodded slowly, still trying to process this turn of events. When would this happen? This afternoon, Thomas said. There is significant media interest. Time is of the essence. As Jason stood there in that small office, he realized that his impulsive action was going to have much bigger consequences than he ever imagined. But maybe, just maybe, something good could come from his terrible mistake. The small press room at the palace was packed with reporters and cameras. Jason sat nervously at a table next to Corporal Wilson, who looked calm and composed in his full dress uniform. Thomas Bennett stood at a podium, explaining the events of the previous day to the gathered media. And so, Thomas concluded, we have brought these 2 gentlemen together today to share their perspectives on what happened and what we can all learn from it. The room went quiet as Wilson leaned toward his microphone. Yesterday, while on duty at my post, I made the decision to break protocol. For a royal guard, this is not done lightly. But I believe that sometimes a human response is needed more than a procedural one. Cameras flashed as Wilson spoke. His voice was steady and clear. The uniform I wear represents centuries of tradition and service. When Mr. Miller threw his drink at me, he did not just disrespect me as a person, but all that this uniform stands for. My first instinct was anger. But my training taught me that how we respond to disrespect says more about us than the disrespect itself. Wilson looked at Jason. I saw an opportunity to turn a moment of poor judgment into a lesson about dignity and respect. Now it was Jason's turn to speak. He took a deep breath and leaned toward his microphone. What I did was wrong, he began simply. I was hot and frustrated, and I acted in a way that I am deeply ashamed of. There is no excuse for disrespecting someone who is serving their country. Jason paused, gathering his thoughts. When Corporal Wilson stepped forward, I thought I was going to be arrested. I deserved to be. But instead, he gave me the chance to make things right. He showed me what real strength looks like. It is not about power or control. It is about keeping your dignity even when others test it. A reporter raised her hand. Jason, the video shows you using your own shirt to clean up the mess. What was going through your mind at that moment? Jason smiled sadly. Honestly, I just wanted to fix what I had done wrong. The shirt seemed unimportant compared to making things right. Another reporter asked Wilson, Corporal, have there been any consequences for you breaking protocol? Wilson straightened in his chair. My commanding officers have reviewed the incident. While my actions were not standard procedure, they have determined that the outcome justified the exception. I have not received any disciplinary action. Thomas stepped in. In fact, the regiment has received numerous messages of support from around the world. Many people have commented on the powerful example of restraint and dignity that Corporal Wilson displayed. As the press conference continued, Mike watched from the back of the room, amazed at how events had unfolded. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends back home who had seen the viral video and recognized Jason. After answering more questions, Thomas announced that the press conference was over. "Thank you all for coming. We hope this incident reminds us all about the importance of mutual respect, especially when visiting other countries and cultures." As people began to leave, Wilson turned to Jason. "You did well," he said quietly. "Thank you," Jason replied. "Not just for that, but for yesterday too. You could have made things much worse for me, but you chose not to." "In my military career, I learned that the right response is not always the easiest one," Wilson said. "Sometimes mercy teaches more than punishment." As they stood up to leave, a palisade approached them. "Mr. Miller, Corporal Wilson, Her Majesty's private secretary, would like a word with you both." Jason's eyes widened. "Her Majesty? You mean the Queen?" "Her private secretary," the aide corrected. "Please come this way." As they followed the aide through the palace corridors, Jason felt like he was in a dream. Just 24 hours ago, he had been a normal tourist making a terrible mistake. Now he was walking through Buckingham Palace, about to meet someone who worked directly with the Queen of England. Wilson walked beside him, looking completely at ease in these grand surroundings. Jason wondered what other surprises this incredible day might bring. The office of the Queen's private secretary was smaller than Jason expected, but very elegant. A woman in a dark suit stood up from behind a large wooden desk as they entered. "Corporal Wilson, Mr. Miller, thank you for coming," she said. "I am Patricia Linden, Her Majesty's private secretary." Jason and Wilson both nodded respectfully. The aide who had brought them there quietly left the room, closing the door behind him. "Please, sit down," Patricia said, gesturing to 2 chairs in front of her desk. Jason sat nervously, trying not to stare at the photos on the wall showing the secretary with the royal family. Wilson sat with perfect posture, looking completely calm. "I will be direct," Patricia began. "Her Majesty has been briefed about yesterday's incident and today's press conference. She was most impressed by how both of you handled the situation, each in your own way." Jason could hardly believe what he was hearing. The Queen of England knew about him, about what he had done. The palace receives many requests for various charities and educational programs. Patricia continued. "One in particular has caught our attention. The International Youth Respect Initiative works with young people to promote cultural understanding and respectful behavior when traveling abroad." She looked directly at Jason. "They have asked if you would consider sharing your experience with their program. And you, Corporal Wilson, they hope you might also participate, schedule permitting." Jason was stunned. "They want me to talk about what I did, but it was terrible." Patricia smiled slightly. "Sometimes the most powerful lessons come from honest accounts of our mistakes. Your public apology and the way you made amends has resonated with many people. The Foundation believes your story could help young travelers understand the importance of respecting other cultures and traditions." Wilson turned to Jason. "It would be your choice, of course, but I believe your perspective would be valuable." Jason thought about it for a moment. If telling my story could prevent someone else from making the same mistake, then yes, I would like to help. "Excellent," Patricia said. "And Corporal Wilson, I would be honored to participate, pending approval from my commanding officers," Wilson replied formally. Patricia nodded. "I will see that the necessary arrangements are made. The Foundation would like to film a short educational video with both of you, if possible, before Mr. Miller returns to America." As they left the meeting, Jason felt a strange mix of emotions. He was still embarrassed about what he had done, but also amazed at how things had turned out. "I never imagined my vacation would include a visit to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen's secretary," he said to Wilson as they walked back through the palace corridors. "Life often takes unexpected turns," Wilson replied. "The key is how we respond to them." Outside the palace, Mike was waiting anxiously. His face lit up when he saw Jason. "There you are. What happened?" "Someone said you were meeting with someone important." Before Jason could answer, a small group of tourists recognized him and Wilson. They pointed and whispered excitedly. One young girl approached them hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said in a French accent. "Are you the guard and the tourist from the video? My whole family watched it this morning. It was a good lesson for us." Wilson nodded politely. "Yes, we are." The girl smiled. "Can we take a picture with you? My brother said we should be respectful to guards after seeing what happened." Jason looked at Wilson, unsure how to respond. To his surprise, Wilson agreed. A quick photo would be fine, as long as no one throws any drinks. The small joke made everyone laugh, breaking the tension. As the girl's family gathered around for a photo, Jason realized how quickly life could change. His moment of bad behavior had somehow turned into an opportunity to spread a positive message. After the photo, as the family walked away, Wilson checked his watch. "I must return to my duties. We will be in touch about the foundation video." "Thank you again," Jason said, extending his hand. "For everything." Wilson shook his hand firmly. "Remember, Mr. Miller, respect is universal. Carry that lesson home with you." As Wilson walked away, Mike turned to Jason with wide eyes. "Are you going to tell me what just happened? And did he just make a joke?" Jason smiled, feeling lighter than he had in days. "Come on, I will tell you everything over lunch. You are not going to believe it." 2 days later, Jason and Mike arrived at a small film studio in central London. The International Youth Respect Initiative had moved quickly to set up the filming before Jason's scheduled flight back to Chicago the next day. A friendly woman named Sarah greeted them at the door. "Welcome, Mr. Miller. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Corporal Wilson is already here." They followed her into the studio where lights and cameras were set up. Wilson stood to one side, once again in his full dress uniform, talking quietly with a man who appeared to be the director. "We will keep this very simple," Sarah explained as she led Jason to a chair. "Just tell your story honestly. What happened, what you learned, and what advice you would give to other travelers." Mike gave Jason an encouraging thumbs up as he took a seat off to the side to watch. The director called for quiet, and the cameras began rolling. First, Wilson spoke about the importance of the Royal Guard tradition and what the uniform represented. Then it was Jason's turn. Looking directly into the camera, Jason told his story without making excuses. "I was hot and frustrated, and I made a terrible choice. I disrespected not just a person, but everything his uniform stands for. What I did not expect was the lesson I would learn afterward." As Jason continued his story, he found the words coming easily. He described how Wilson's dignity and restraint had shown him what true strength looked like. "When he asked me to clean up my mess, I realized that taking responsibility is not just about saying sorry. It is about fixing what you broke when possible and learning from it when it cannot be fixed." After they finished their individual segments, the director had them sit together for a conversation about respect across cultures. "What would you say to young people traveling to other countries?" the interviewer asked. "Remember that you are a guest," Jason replied. "The customs and traditions might be different from your home, but they deserve your respect. Your behavior reflects not just on you, but on your entire country." Wilson nodded in agreement, and understand that respect is not weakness, it is strength. It shows confidence in who you are while honoring who others are. When the filming finished, Sarah approached them with a big smile. "That was perfect. The foundation will distribute this video to schools and youth programs around the world. We believe it will make a real difference." As they prepared to leave, Wilson handed Jason a small box. "A token from the regiment," he said. Jason opened it to find a pin with the insignia of the Royal Guard. "I cannot accept this," he said, surprised. "You can, and you should," Wilson replied. "Consider it a reminder of the lesson, not the mistake." Mike, who had been watching from the sidelines, finally spoke up. "This whole thing is incredible. Who would have thought throwing a soda would end up like this? Life gives us defining moments, Wilson said. This was one for both of us. Outside the studio, reporters had gathered, having heard about the filming. They called out questions and took photos as Jason, Mike, and Wilson emerged from the building. "Do you regret what happened?" one reporter shouted to Jason. Jason thought for a moment before answering. "I regret my actions, but not what I learned from them." Sometimes our worst moments can lead to our best growth. Another reporter turned to Wilson. "Will you continue as a royal guard after all this attention?" "Of course," Wilson replied firmly. "It is my honor to serve. This changes nothing about my duty." As they walked away from the reporters, Wilson turned to Jason. "Your flight is tomorrow." Jason nodded, back to real life. "Though I doubt things will ever be quite the same." "They should not be," Wilson said. "That is the point of learning." They said their goodbyes, and Jason watched as the guard walked away, straight-backed and dignified as ever. It struck him that in just a few days, this man had completely changed how Jason saw himself and the world around him. "Ready to see a bit more of London before we leave?" Mike asked, bringing Jason back to the present. "Yes," Jason replied. "But this time, I think I will be much more respectful of everything I see." 1 year later, Jason Miller stood in front of 300 high school students in Chicago. The large screen behind him showed a photo of him and Corporal Wilson taken during their educational video filming in London. "This time last year, I was just a tourist who made a terrible mistake," Jason began. "I threw a soda at a royal guard in London because I was hot and frustrated. It was the worst decision of my life, but it led to the most important lesson I have ever learned." The students watched with interest as Jason told his story. Since returning from London, he had become a regular speaker for the International Youth Respect Initiative. He had visited schools across America, sharing his experience and the lessons he had learned. "The video we made has now been viewed by over 50 million people," Jason continued. "But more importantly, it has become part of educational programs in 27 countries." After his presentation, the students asked questions. One boy raised his hand. "Do you still talk to the guard?" Jason smiled. "Corporal Wilson and I email each other once a month. He is still serving with the Royal Guards, though he now also helps train new guards about how to handle difficult situations with tourists." A girl in the front row asked, "Were you scared when you got back home that people would recognize you from the video?" "I was terrified," Jason admitted. "But something interesting happened. People did recognize me, but most of them wanted to talk about the apology and what happened after, not about my mistake. That taught me that people are often willing to forgive if you take responsibility and try to make things right." As the students filed out after the talk, the school principal approached Jason. "That was excellent. The students were really engaged. I think your story reaches them because you are so honest about your mistake." "Thank you," Jason replied. "It took me a while to be able to talk about it without feeling deep shame. But Corporal Wilson taught me that our mistakes do not define us unless we let them." Later that evening, Jason checked his email and found a message from Wilson. The timing was perfect, as always. "Dear Jason," the email read, "I thought you would like to know that the Guard training program now includes a section on dignified responses to tourist incidents. We call it the soda scenario. Your story continues to teach new guards the importance of measured responses and the power of allowing others to make amends. I hope your school visits are going well. Respectfully, James Wilson." Jason smiled as he typed his reply, telling Wilson about the day's presentation and the students' reactions. Before he finished the email, his phone rang. It was Sarah from the foundation. "Jason, great news," she said when he answered. "The royal family has agreed to host a special ceremony honoring the first anniversary of the educational program. Both you and Corporal Wilson are invited to London next month. The Queen herself may attend." Jason could hardly believe what he was hearing. "The Queen? Are you serious?" "Completely serious," Sarah replied. Your story has had a bigger impact than any of us expected. Tourist incidents at Buckingham Palace have decreased by 40% since the video began circulating. The palace wants to recognize that achievement. After the call ended, Jason sat quietly, thinking about how much his life had changed in just 1 year. From a frustrated tourist who lost his temper to someone invited to meet the Queen of England. It seemed impossible. He finished his email to Wilson, adding the news about the ceremony. As he hit send, he thought about all the students he had spoken to over the past year. He hoped that by sharing his story, some of them might avoid making similar mistakes. On his desk sat the Royal Guard pin that Wilson had given him. Jason picked it up, running his finger over the emblem. It had become his most valued possession, not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. Respect, dignity, responsibility, second chances. Jason had gone to London expecting to see the sights and take some photos. Instead, he had learned the most important lesson of his life, captured in one moment that made the whole world stop breathing as a royal guard stepped forward and showed him the true meaning of dignity. And for that, despite everything, Jason was deeply grateful.